Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Converse. Viewers, since January 30th this year, the rupee has dropped more than 8%. Viewers, against the dollar primarily. I'm not looking at other currencies right now. Alarm bells are going off because of this in certain quarters, in certain circles. The rupee hit its lowest ever against the dollar just a few days ago. Many are saying that the rupee's weakness is a signal that the fundamentals of the economy itself are weak. The opposition has in fact taken us back several years to 2013 when they said that the then Chief Minister of Gujarat, who's currently of course our Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, had pulled up the UPA and compared the weakening rupee very closely to the weakening grip of the UPA on India's economic prospects. In fact, he called it a derivative of poor economic management. For this reason, the opposition today says it's entitled to ask the same question and make the same claims. The ruling party, on the other hand, is saying that India's economic fundamentals are very strong. We've also had economists writing in newspapers, and I'm sure you've come across some of these articles, that is, if anyone reads anymore. But viewers, they're saying that let's divorce the two. Let's not talk about economic weakness, and they've listed a large number of statistics. One of the other reasons that is being cited, of course, is that the economy and India as such is being buffeted by strong headwinds. It wasn't just one black swan event, which we've just come and overcome, but also, of course, the prolonged Ukraine crisis. Viewers, what really ails the rupee? Let's ask some of those fundamental questions, and I don't think we could have assembled a more informed panel than we have tonight. On my right, Jayant Sinha, Member of Parliament and Chairperson for the Standing Committee on Finance. On my left, Dr. Pavan K. Varma, author, ex-member of Parliament of the Rajya Sabha, former diplomat, a polymath, call him what you want. Prasenjit K. Basu, who's an author, again to my right, to Mr. Jayant Sinha's right, and to my left, Professor Sarthi Acharya, former Chief Technical Advisor at the UNDP for Southeast Asia. And let me begin with you first, Mr. Jayant Sinha. And I'm going to begin with a quote of the Prime Minister. All those many years ago, 2013, if I'm not mistaken, when the rupee was crashing, and he said, the country is disappointed today because the government is neither concerned about the economy nor the falling rupee. It's only worried about saving its chair. The context, of course, was different. Today, you don't have those problems, at least about worrying about your chair, if one were to honestly assess the political situation. But he did say the rupee has fallen rapidly in the past 3 months, but the government has not taken any steps in the last 3 months to strengthen the rupee against the dollar. And this is because there is a problem at the fundamental level with the economy. Why shouldn't that charge be thrown at you today?
The Honorable Prime Minister Rahul was right then, and he's right now.
Okay.
In 2013, India was bracketed with the fragile five because most countries were actually quite stable, their currencies were fine. It was just the Indian rupee that was declining the way it was, and along with the Indian rupee, there were a few other countries like Turkey as well that were facing these kinds of problems. That was 2013. Today, it's 2022, and the picture is completely different. Now, while the rupee has declined, as you said, about 9 or 10% since January of this year, other currencies have done far worse. So India right now is a haven of macroeconomic stability. Other major currencies like the sterling, like the yen, like the euro are down 15-20%, while the Indian rupee is standing strong, down just 8 or 9%. since the start of this year against the dollar. And the reason why the dollar has gone up is because the Fed has had to execute a very, very dramatic and abrupt rise in interest rates to be able to deal with inflation, which is at 40-year highs in the US. So they've got to trigger a hard landing. They've got to fight inflation in the US. They've been raising rates. And as they've been raising rates, all those economies, all those currencies that don't have very good macroeconomic fundamentals are crashing, are not doing well. On the other hand, the Indian economy and the Indian currency remains very, very stable given this volatility and this turbulence. So the Honorable Prime Minister was right to blame macroeconomic management in 2013, and he's absolutely right to praise the macroeconomic stability that we have right now and the way in which we've managed our fundamentals.
Mr. Varma, are you convinced, as an opening remark, I'm going to take it, of course, from the entire panel, but as an opening remark, are you convinced with what Mr. Jayant Sinha is saying tonight?
No, I try to avoid speaking in black and white polarities. I think no government, no criticism of any government can say that it has not done anything. And I'm sure this government too, on several fronts, has made new beginnings or important beginnings. The problem is that what we use to attack one government often comes back to haunt you. In fact, the current Prime Minister and then Chief Minister of Gujarat had said the rupee is falling because of the blatant corruption in the UPA government. He didn't go into the reasons why. He linked these two things. Should it be responsible for us to do the same now? I don't think these polemics matter. The important point is, and I really regret to say this, I think Prime Minister Modi and the BJP had an advantage which the UPA never had. They came with an absolute majority. And the nation was expecting that with this absolute majority in 2014 and repeated in 2019, the Modi government lost a historic chance to have a strategic vision to do something fundamental towards the strengthening of the economy. So they have, in a way, in my view, fallen flat between two stools. They have not as vigorously pushed economic reform and modernization. On the same hand, they have not done enough for the visible inequality of the country. Let me say this, and I don't say this as a criticism necessarily. It has always been there, but perhaps today, Rahul, we must be one of the most unequal societies of the world. 1% of the richest own 23% of the wealth of the country. 10% of the richest own 77% wealth of the country. I'm not against corporate tigers, and they should be encouraged, but the billionaires' incomes have, in spite of the black swan event, gone up by 10 times. The poor in these last years by only 1%, and you know the rate of inflation and what that means. So people have been knocked off the middle class. The number of the absolute poor have grown. The BJP is living under the awning of a resurrection of India shining. And we have genuine pain and hurt at the level of the common people. If a cylinder costs 1,000 rupees, if edible oil costs 200 rupees, if 344% has been the additionality on fuel in terms of taxes, somebody is paying. And as far as jobs are concerned, I didn't want to repeat because you began the program with that. The Prime Minister came and there was hope in him. He said 2 crore jobs I'll create. Instead, according to the CMIE, we've lost something like 12 crore jobs. 22 crore people applied for a job, 7.2 lakh people got a job. So obviously, while there were some important interventions like the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Act, RERA, I commend the government for it. But he didn't move strongly enough on the necessary economic reform, and certainly, in spite of the welfareism post-COVID, he has not done enough. I'll give one example only. If we are doing so well and if the fundamentals are fine, the global hunger index, we were at number 55 in 2014. Today in 2021, we are at 101. So if these fundamentals are not taken care of, we have to ask ourselves whether actually the macro fundamentals are right.
Quick riposte.
Our growth is at 7%. We have come out of a very difficult COVID period by supporting our population. 800 million people, 80 crore people have got free rations. This has really got India through a very difficult time, and our recovery now is very strong. Foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investment, private sector investment, all are going strong right now. We have made the hard reforms to be able to position our economy in this fashion. If we had not made those reforms, Pavanji talked about the insolvency and bankruptcy court, which of course I've done a lot of work in, but he didn't mention GST, he didn't mention privatization, he didn't mention what we've done with the public sector banks, and on and on and on, the production-linked incentive programs. The number of reforms, the way in which we have repositioned our economy so that it can sustain 7% growth going forward is extraordinary. And of course, there are issues with respect to creating more jobs and so on, but even there the numbers, if you actually look at organized job creation through the numbers that come out through EPFO and so on, those have also been quite strong. So overall, I would say that the economic performance of this government, given the challenges and crises that the entire global economy has gone through over the last 5 years, has been extraordinary, which is why the macroeconomic fundamentals are as strong as they are. Growth is as strong as it is. The current account deficit, fiscal deficit, all of it is under control when you compare it to other economies. And you can see in the consumption numbers right now, in the growth numbers right now, an economy that's roaring back to life and creating lots of jobs.
Okay, let's dig a little deeper with statistics and with two economists also beyond Mr. Sinha. Prasenjit K. Bose, let me quote Mr. Chidambaram, the former finance minister, and he says, the fall in the dollar-rupee rate is inevitable given our current account deficit, inflation, increase in interest rates domestically and in the US, outflow of foreign portfolio investment and decline in exports. The exchange rate must be viewed as a price. It is one of the trinities that the RBI has to manage. The rupee will gain only when the fundamentals improve, unquote. That's his rather long-winded way of saying we're a disaster.
We're far from it. I think the reality is that, first of all, he talked about exports declining. Which world is he in? India's exports grew 42% in 2021. That was the fastest growth of any major economy in the world. In fact, the fastest growth in Asia.
Basis?
This
On a
is
year-to-year basis?
Annual
No,
growth.
but in comparison with the previous year.
Yes, 42%. In the first 6 months of this calendar year, they grew 24.5%. They then decelerated sharply. Yes, they decelerated, but they still grew in July and August, grew about 2%. Now, 2% year on year. So exports are not contracting by any means. This is just goods exports. If you look at India's share of US imports, they've steadily gone up, and India's share is now 2.7%. In 2014, it was about 1.6%. So there's been a significant increase. India's share of world exports has gone up. Now, let's look at the rupee. The rupee this year has appreciated against the Chinese renminbi. It has appreciated nearly 10% against the euro and the sterling, that's the British currency, the pound sterling. It has appreciated nearly 18% against the Japanese yen and the Korean won. Now, Korean won, Japanese yen, Chinese renminbi are some of Asia's strongest economies and currencies. Under normal circumstances, the rupee has actually done better against them. Now, we are in a period of dollar strength. The dollar is strengthening. Now, if you just look back to 2011 and 2013, in 2011, over a 6-month period, the rupee depreciated 15% against the dollar. Again, in 2013, it depreciated 15%. Now, 15% is normally considered a currency crisis. We are not in a currency crisis by any means now. And the reason is that the Indian economy has deleveraged. If you look at the corporate sector, if you look at the banking system, the credit growth over the last 8 years has averaged 9% annual average growth. So in the period from 2004 to 2014, average annual credit growth was 23%. As a result of that, we had the so-called twin deficit problem. We had the twin balance sheet crisis, crisis of the banking system and a crisis in the corporate sector. That has been largely dealt with through a period of extreme prudence. The banks have been extremely prudent. And in terms of external debt of India had increased 296% between 2004 and 2014. Over the last 8 years, it's increased only 39%. So India is deleveraging in terms of external debt. It is deleveraging in terms of domestic indebtedness of corporates and of the exposure of the banking system to that indebtedness. And all of this is contributing to macroeconomic stability. And that is why, if you look at the stock market's performance, in the last 3 months, India has outperformed almost all the world stock markets. We've been in a bear market globally. India has outperformed the rest of Asia. It has outperformed the US. And the reason is that India's economy is strong. Real GDP is growing, likely to grow about 7.5% this year. Nominal GDP is growing very strongly. As a result, corporate revenues are doing well. But even more importantly, the government's revenues are booming. And as a result, the fiscal deficit is coming down. The net market borrowing by the government, both central and state, in the year to date, in the fiscal year to date this year, is actually down year on year. This is remarkable in a world where almost everybody else has a debt crisis. There is a massive problem of debt in the United States, where the public debt is nearly 100% of GDP. In the UK, it's over 100% of GDP. Italy, it's 150% of GDP. And now across the world, you have a serious debt crisis. India is the one place that is a relative island of stability amid this sea of troubles
reams
around the
after
world.
reams.
This is the reality.
Mr. Basu is adding a lot of facts to what I said, where India is a haven of macroeconomic stability and growth. Right?
Okay, but reams after reams. And, I've been sort of reading up quite a bit before I got in here because, I have to sort of bandy wits with people who understand economics far better than I do, so I better be a little prepared. Look, the depreciating rupee is likely to have an impact on, your imports, your loans, your stocks. You were mentioning that as some sort of a sunrise sort of sector of the economy. Cars, foreign education, foreign travel. Let's, for a moment, discount the last two, Mr. Sinha, but loans will have a direct. The depreciating rupee will have a problem on.
Loans will go up if the
Yes.
RBI continues to raise rates.
Exactly.
Which they will have to do a little bit because the Fed is raising rates as much
Yes,
as
which
it
will
is.
have a direct impact
So
on.
it will have some impact, but you have to understand that we have still tremendously robust growth going on. And so any concerns that people have about their loans or whatever is made up by the fact that their wages are also going to go up dramatically as well because of the growth that we have. And as a result of that, people are on a year-on-year basis continuously getting better off, and you're seeing that in their consumption patterns as well.
Professor Acharya, doesn't this all feed into each other at some point?
Well, let's put it this way. The present debate of the rupee going down, everybody says, okay, it's gone down from 78 to 81 in the last 2-3 months. And the obvious culprits are the prices of petroleum, the trade disruption, which is happening for a variety of reasons, supply chains getting affected, local inflation, food, and flight of capital from India. Lots of companies are leaving, and so is the capital market. A lot of money is flowing out from there. This is the current explanation which is given. My thinking is as follows. I look at it a little longer, as Pavan Ji had said. Look at 1947, we were exchanging at 4 rupees. Now we are exchanging at 80 rupees. So there's been a 75% fall in the rupee. And I have actually computed the whole thing. There has been a secular fall all along. And why has this happened? Because in no year, and I underline no year, have we had a current account, or rather, put it this way, a current trade surplus anywhere. We have always been a deficit economy. So when we are a deficit economy, we have to borrow from somewhere else. We have to beg, borrow, steal from banks overseas, and our people working in the Middle East send the money, and that is how we kind of cover up some of the deficits. We borrow from ADB, we borrow from the World Bank, we borrow from the capital account into the current account. That's also a bit done. So in a way, if we have a look, our economy has had a long-term kind of a trend where the rupee has been going down. And if you ask me personally, I have seen many economies when I was in the UN. We have this kind of a tendency in many economies where a continuous deficit in the trade will lead to continuous depreciation of the currency. Why are we having this kind of a problem? Why are we not able to export? Now, if you look at the composition of the exports, we have gems and jewels, we have petroleum products. Gems and jewels we import, we do some value adding and export. Same thing with automobiles, which are our companies. Tatas and Mahindras are not the number one companies. It's Japanese companies, it's Korean companies, they import a lot of stuff, export some, so we lose money there. The third one, machinery. Fourth thing, pharma. Pharma, we say we are the world's third largest, but the fact is a lot of active ingredients coming from overseas.
APIs.
APIs, as you call them. So how much net foreign exchange are we gaining? Now, this kind of a situation has been there for a very long time. Modi ji has tried to change some of this in the Made in India scheme. But what has happened? If you look at some of these companies like Samsung, which have come here, Sony, which have come here, how much of value added is being done in India? It's a small 10% or 20%. Rest of it, it's not. And the money is expatriated back to the home country. So we have a serious problem of technological gap in this country. And everybody is talking about a techno era. Where are we in technology? We don't have the skills, scale, and speed which other countries are having, like China, for example. If you take the microchips, we started thinking about it in 2006-07. We still don't have it. China started thinking about it at the same time. They got it by 13-14, and they are manufacturing not the best of the chips, but they're still doing it. What we do is we export our best manpower. Let them do it there rather than here. So there was a time when the whole of top IIT cream used to go to America. They would make the products and our people would sell them. And those people who didn't go went into management. So the hard engineering, which they did for 4, 5, 6 years, like some of us did, hard engineering would convert into selling the product, managing people, managing finances. So we really haven't gained in science and technology, and top of it, the government is spending less than 1% of the GDP compared to, say, China, which is spending 2 or 3%, Korea, which is spending 7% on research and development. So we have a serious problem of having to slip back on a long-term basis in technology, and that is the reason why many of these things are slipping.
Okay, let me just bring you in, and the two of you. Mr. Sinha, how much of a cushion do we really have? Let's assume for a moment that there's going to be another cycle of interest rate hikes in the US, for instance. Someone was talking about the high level of inflation in the United States. Obviously, that will put more pressure on the Indian currency, the rupee. Now, I ask you about the cushion because the RBI intervention meant that our foreign exchange reserves have depleted by more than, if I'm not mistaken, $90 billion since the start of the year. So what are we looking at here?
Well, we have to look at it, first of all, in the perspective of the global economy. In the global economy, as I said, the Fed is engineering much higher rates to be able to bring down the growth in the US economy and bring down inflation as a result of that. So they've already raised rates by 325 basis points in the last 8 or 9 months. The predictions right now are that they'll raise it by another 100 basis points or so, which is going to actually result in a situation where the dollar is probably going to continue to strengthen, and the global economy is going to continue to weaken. We have more than ample reserves to be able to deal with this situation. We had $645 billion of foreign exchange reserves. They're at $550 billion right now, and the rupee is finding its own level. And what the RBI is doing, and absolutely correctly so, is ensuring that there is a smooth sort of decline to some extent of the Indian rupee, as opposed to any uncertainty, any high volatility, etc. So you need enough of a cushion to be able to manage that volatility, which is what the RBI has, and has plenty of it going forward. Now, in addition to that, not just about the reserves that we have plenty of, but also in terms of our continued economic strength going forward, we will continue to see strong capital flows. We're expecting $100 billion of gross FDI. Foreign portfolio investment has started to come up again in September. It's been $10 billion positive. And our exports will continue, I think, to gain market share, to continue to be competitive. The professor from the UN said was only focused on merchandise trade. He didn't talk about services, where India is a global leader in services, in IT services, BPO, and a variety of other services. So our services are generating huge capital surpluses, and that's also enabling us to continue to be able to deal with this difficult set of global economic conditions.
Mr. Varma.
You see, I think that there is a system in place in our country, not only because of the current government, but because of successive governments which allow for, most often than not, competent macro management of the economy. I mean, we are not becoming Sri Lanka, which collapses. Let's agree
I'm glad that you've made that point, because that's been a narrative quite persistent.
I have written about it, I've spoken about it. It's not that. But I am actually trying to look at what could be improved or what has not improved fast enough, rather than Dr. Basu to paint a picture by which India is the model economy not only of the world but of the cosmos. I mean, we've got to have a sense of perspective. I talk to corporate leaders, and there are factors which are non-economic which also impact the economy. Corporate leaders are generally happy with the government, but they say, but we don't want to invest right now because the situation is too volatile and the punitive powers of the government are too unpredictable. So that's an aspect. I mean, that's an aspect of reality which has an economic impact. As far as the GST is concerned, Jayant highlighted it as one of the great achievements. I'm not against the reform, but I maintain that it was badly planned. Perhaps as Jayant was in as finance minister, he could have done a better job. But nevertheless, then there are in the corporate world, for which a lot of you on my right speak, there is a feeling that there is a saying process of selectivity. I mean, I have been told by them that certain big tenders are drawn up, which by their very nature only one company qualifies. It happens to be a company which is close to the government. So there is this charge of crony capitalism. Then I must confess, that's the elephant in the room, the manner in which decisions of a huge economic impact are made. Demonetization, overnight. The former Prime Minister said, and many supporters of the BJP agree, that it shaved off 2% of the GDP. Then the farming sector. We saw the catastrophe over the farm laws. Again, I'm saying the reforms are not good, were not bad. They were needed. But no process of consultation before they were implemented, which led to breakdown of trust and a trust deficit and so on and so forth. There is also the situation of the current banning of food exports. You give 500 to the farmer as dole and reduce his income by 700 because he can't get the prices for his product. You've got to think through the flight of capital. If not capital, talent. I meet so many young people, Rahul, who are successful entrepreneurs with the best degrees who say, no, because of the endemic social instability here and the unpredictability of the law enforcers, we rather stay abroad. Na jaane kal humko kya hoga. So this kind of thing is bad. Health and education, a macro economy with the right macro fundamentals should have taken care of it. We spent, then Jayant has been involved with the budget. What is the percentage we spent on health and education? Compare it with other countries. I think it's a shame for the country with our kind of problem. So I'm just saying, please use a more objective criteria to draw up a balance sheet. Instead of this greatly euphoric account of where the economy is going, I think it's not appropriate. People who are listening to this program, I know that roughly 20% of the middle class has fallen off that plateau below. I know the number of the poor have increased. So these are factors we must take into account.
Okay.
I'm sure we are not going to go down as an economy.
Okay, final quick comments. Yes, extreme right.
Yeah, well, I think let's begin with the contention that I have said that India is the most glorious economy in the world. By no means is it the most glorious economy in the world. It simply is currently very well positioned macroeconomically. Of course, we are still a poor country. We're still a low middle income country. There's a lot to be done. There is still a lot to be done to advance this economy and take it forward. But I think, given that there's been a panoply of criticism of virtually anything, let me just also point out that in terms of delivering the basics of a civilized life to the vast majority of India's people, the last 8 years have been a remarkable period. I think it is a disgrace that more than half our people had to defecate in the open. That abomination has been largely dealt with by this government. So the last 8 years have brought that about. Cooking gas at home is something that most people in urban India take for granted. Half of our women in rural India didn't have access to a basic LPG account. Oh, well, that is a global problem. It's not just ours.
It becomes global.
You cannot say it. I mean, obviously, you have to price things appropriately. And to the extent that the government can afford, to the extent that the government can afford to subsidize, it subsidizes. And it, in fact, during the COVID period, the subsidies provided were appropriate to ensure that people
so it's been a remarkable period. Mr. Sinha, let me paraphrase. He sort of did not mention or didn't give form to the elephants in the room. That could be a threat, to growth, etc., investor confidence. So let's just break these down. And I want your quick response before we wind up. Raid Raj, ED, CBI, adventurism, social tensions that are building up and constantly being written about that some people believe tarnish the India story, the emerging India story, the growing India story, etc. And all of these serve as disincentives when you look at it from a larger perspective. You can talk numbers, but there are other factors at work.
We actually have to talk the numbers,
yes,
because the media headlines are what people put out who have an agenda or who have to be in the opposition and criticize the government. So that's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, when you actually look at the numbers and you look at the hard facts on the ground, as Dr. Basu was just saying, the lives of the poor have been transformed in terms of basic services. If you look at how competitive our economy is, if you look at the middle class, if you look at people that are integrated into the global economy, and the most important thing for them is how competitive is India now compared to where India was 8 or 10 years ago. That has also been transformed. So if you look at the poor who did not have access to water, did not have access to electricity, did not have access to cooking fuel, all of that has been transformed on the one hand. And on the other hand, when we look at the competitive modern economy that we have to operate so that we can grow and create good jobs for our middle class, that too has been transformed, whether it's through GST, insolvency and bankruptcy code, privatization, opening up of multiple sectors of the economy, reduction of corporate tax rates. All of these have contrived to create a situation where we've got a very competitive economy. That's why our exports are growing both on the merchandise side as well as on the services side. And we are seeing the job growth as we have. I drove into the studio right now, and you look around in Noida or you look around in Gurgaon or any of the very bustling and very, very buzzing areas of our cities where people are adding jobs, people are exporting around the world and creating high quality middle class lifestyles for our people. So if you look at the performance of the economy, despite everything that we've gone through, overall, I would submit that there are very few other major economies in the world that have done as good a job in the last 10 years, and that's because of the astute policy making of the government, the Honorable Prime Minister, and the decisive and bold steps that our government has taken. You look at the US and see the situation they are in. Look at China and see the situation. Growth is slowing. They've got real problems with COVID. Look at what's happening in the UK. Look at what's happening in the European Union. You look around the world and you see other major economies and how it's positioned, how they are positioned. You look at India and how India is positioned, both in terms of where the poor and the middle class are, as well as the competitive aspects of our economy as. And I think anybody looking at the facts is going to have to conclude this has been a transformational journey.
Look,
Can I say one word in response?
yes.
I began by saying that let's not look at things in black and white. But unfortunately, I was a little surprised because I'm very fond of Jayant. He said any criticism is part of political agenda and we don't have to talk about it. If you take this approach...
He actually said it's okay.
Headlines.
It's okay.
Said that about media headlines.
I'm just saying...
There's a lot of rhetoric that comes out, and ultimately when you have to dispassionately pass that rhetoric, you have to look at the facts and what's actually happening on the ground.
Well, look, let's for a moment step back and focus on the numbers. Now, viewers, even over those, there are debates. The accuracy of numbers, the potency of the number, etc. So, look, we have a situation right now where the only number perhaps we can really go by to gauge sentiment across this country, and some people will fault me for bringing out this analogy, is perhaps the number of votes that people are getting. I don't know. Is that one way of looking at this? Pavan, Varma, very quickly, if you are able to fight an election on your economic record and people are voting you back on the basis of that, could you then say that, look, the numbers tell me that I am doing well by the people? Is that a fair assessment?
Do not for a moment doubt the democratic legitimacy of the government.
Okay.
I wonder whether it has truly fulfilled the expectations who have voted and expressed confidence.
Okay, well, that of course, they also say about expectations that they don't have very many limitations. Now, viewers, look, we've had a very interesting debate, and I don't want to color this debate with my opinion here. I leave it to you to decide. We've had a conversation. I hope we can continue these conversations in the manner that we have debated tonight. Thank you very much for watching.